Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started in one moment. Again, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to get started in one moment. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Culture, Corridors, and Community, How Food Entrepreneurship Strengthens Local Economies. We're excited to have you all here as part of AEO's Data to Dialogue series. To kick things off, it's my pleasure to introduce Natalie Madeira Cofield, President and CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity. Under her leadership, AEO has been driving force in creating opportunities for underserved entrepreneurs across the country. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you all so much for having me, for joining us today, these incredible speakers that we have, and thank you to our team. As was just shared by Renee, our Vice President for Regional Partnerships and Engagement, my name is Natalie Madeira Cofield, and I have the honor of serving as the President and CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity. I'm glad to have you all with us today for our Data to Dialogue conversation, Culture, Corridors, and Community, How Food Entrepreneurship Strengthens Local Economies. We were just chatting about the fact that food can be such a powerful vessel for both arts as well as for cultural exploration. And that's very consistent with the mission and theme of who AEO is. At AEO, our mission is to advance inclusive entrepreneurship and ensure that small business owners have the tools, capital, and supports that they need to thrive. Through our Data to Dialogue series, we aim to bridge research and practice, translating data into stories, solutions, and strategies that can strengthen local economies across the country. That bridge is especially clear today. The findings that we'll share through our incredible leadership and through the panel remarks will show and shape the continuous learning that has happened with the Greater Chatham initiative, which has been a powerful model for place-based, culture-rooted entrepreneurship through its Food Lab Chicago initiative. AEO has had the privilege of partnering with GCI to evaluate this work over the past 5 years. And today we're thrilled to bring those insights together with new research from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago on how restaurant corridors fuel neighborhood vitality. But just as importantly, we'll hear from community and philanthropic leaders who are advancing similar work across Chicago, including the Little Village Chamber of Commerce, the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community, and the Chicago Community Trust. Together, these perspectives highlight how food entrepreneurship can help communities reimagine what inclusive growth looks like. We're honored to co-host today's event with the National Middle Neighborhoods Initiative and deeply grateful to all of our speakers and partners for joining us. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Nidra Sims-Fears, Executive Director of the Greater Chatham Initiative, whose vision and leadership have made Food Lab Chicago an inspiring example of community-driven entrepreneurship. Nidra?
Thank you, Natalie. It's been an honor and privilege to work with AEO on our Food Lab Chicago project for the last 5 years. So I'm Nidra Sims-Fears, the Executive Director of the Greater Chatham Initiative. We're a place-based economic and community development organization centered in the heart of the South Side of Chicago, and we serve 4 predominantly Black proud Chicago neighborhoods: Chatham, Avalon Park, Auburn, Gresham, and Greater Grand Crossing. I'm a daughter of Chatham. I live here, and we were really pleased when we found out, it's been in 2018, Next Street did an analysis, and they learned that 50% of the food-based businesses on the South and West Side, which is Chicago's predominantly ethnic and racial enclaves, 50% of the businesses were food-based businesses, and they needed a business support system. So we stepped in and provided scientific business learnings on how to be profitable as a restaurateur and caterer so that we can serve our communities. What we learned through the process is that in Greater Chatham, we had over 1,000 businesses, of which a third were served soul food, Caribbean, and West African food, and that was an enclave. So that before, when I used to say, oh my God, we have another jerk chicken place, now I say, oh my God, we have another jerk chicken place, because over 2 million people from all over Chicagoland come and eat in our food districts. So we wanted to help those restaurants thrive and be nurtured. And so that's what led to Food Lab Chicago. And we're very proud of the work that's going to be presented here today. And so with that, I'm going to introduce my long-term friend and colleague, Marsha Netland from Middle Neighborhoods, and she will talk about her work as in middle neighborhoods and how, and I just want to say, our neighborhoods, Greater Chatham, are middle neighborhoods. With that, Marsha, thank you.
Thank you, Nidra. Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here and so honored to be able to share this webinar with AEO and with the Greater Chatham Initiative and the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. It's really fantastic. So I have a couple of slides to show you everybody, just to let you know what the National Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is. There's a lot of overlap in our interests, and all of our practitioners today who are going to be talking about the food sectors in their business districts are what we would consider to be middle neighborhoods. So Lori, you want to pull my 2 slides up? And I can sort of start in and say that the National Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is a largely volunteer-based initiative that is organized to focus attention on middle neighborhoods, which we think of as neither the most distressed in a community, nor are they the healthiest. But we've been observing, when you look at their long-term data, that they're disappearing through either decline because no one pays attention to them, or through gentrification, because in hotter markets, they are the places where people are starting to find renewed interest. We do this attention focusing through a community of practice, of which I'm an organizer, and Nidra is the chair. We do research, we do policy analysis and advocacy, and a bunch of communication strategies. We're co-sponsored by the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America, and we have a steering committee of about 20 people who are a mix of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And we'd love for you to join us at ncst.org/middle-neighborhoods. And I have one more slide, which is just about what middle neighborhoods are. If you're trying to imagine what those places are in your community, their characteristics that are common is, as I said, they're neither the most distressed nor the healthiest. They've tended to be overlooked by philanthropy and policy because people sort of thought they could be on autopilot and do fine. They were built mostly with single-family homes because their target market was families with children. They tend to have 50% more owner occupancy, but they initially had much higher rates, so that's been eroding over time. They have housing stock that's aging. It's in generally acceptable condition. Its challenge often is that it lacks the features and updates that would allow it to compete well for today's home buyers. And so that's part of the reason why you see more and more investor ownership. One of the things I love about middle neighborhoods, and we'll find this echoed throughout our discussion today, is that they tend to be more racially, ethnically, and economically diverse than either their lower or higher income counterparts. They kind of are those mixed income, mixed family type, mixed, housing ownership type neighborhoods that most people in community development have been trying to create, nurture, and sustain. So that's it about middle neighborhoods. And now I want to introduce the first person who's going to speak about the research that's been done, and that's Dr. Lori Smith, who is the Senior Research Advisor at AEO. Take it away, Lori.
Great. Thank you so much, Marsha. I'm honored to be here with you all today. I am Lori Smith from AEO, and today we're thrilled to share what we've learned from evaluating 5 years of Food Lab Chicago's impact. So in 2020, when the pandemic forced dining rooms closed across the country, the Greater Chatham Initiative launched something new, Food Lab Chicago. And Food Lab Chicago started as an emergency lifeline, a way to help restaurateurs hold on to their businesses during the pandemic, but it quickly became much more than that. So now, our analysis is based on 5 cohorts from 2020 to 2024, and each cohort brought together 10 to 20 food entrepreneurs for hands-on coaching, peer learning, and workshops. Participants learned menu costing, bookkeeping, and digital tools, but they also learned how to tell the story behind their food. And so now, 5 years later, since starting in 2020, now through 5 cohorts and 81 businesses, we can see how this model has reshaped Greater Chatham. So Food Lab turned survival into strategy. As Nidra was sharing, Food Lab showed that if every plate is profitable, a business can be profitable. And then when food businesses thrive, entire neighborhoods thrive. So culture is really at the core of Food Lab's model. 83% of participants made brand or storytelling changes tied to cultural identity by rewriting menus, updating mission statements, and integrating family history into their business identity. But these entrepreneurs didn't just improve marketing, they reclaimed heritage as a competitive advantage. Their stories and flavors turned Southside restaurants into landmarks of Black culinary excellence. And the impact we found reaches far beyond individual kitchens. By 2023, Greater Chatham's food district was attracting over 2 million visitors a year, establishing Greater Chatham as Chicago's soul food, Caribbean, and West African culinary destination. So this culinary visibility is transforming how people experience and invest in the Southside's food corridors. So as Aisha Murph of Harris Gulf Shrimp put it, Food Lab is getting the word out about hidden gems, restaurants like mine, to people who might not have thought to come here. And so her words capture what this program does best. It turns culture into connection and connection into community strength. Another one of Food Lab's most powerful outcomes isn't financial, it's relational. So in a very isolating industry, Food Lab created a sense of connection. Participants reported greater confidence, almost all reported greater confidence, and also being part of a supportive business community. So as Michelle Wilson of Sunday's Catering said, Food Lab feels like the mentor I was trying to reach out to when I first started. I had nobody, not a soul, and now I feel like I have someone. And her words capture what this program has built, not just stronger businesses, but a community that lifts as it grows. And at its heart, Food Lab is about financial resilience. So on the operations side, entrepreneurs learned to cost every dish, to standardize portions, and to adjust prices with confidence. And these seemingly small shifts, tracking costs, updating menus, adopting digital tools, have really transformed these businesses' bottom lines. So as Bettina told us, Food Lab has been more than a resource. It's been a turning point in how I operate and grow. And Bettina went on to tell us about how Food Lab helped her understand her margins, how to price her products in a way that's sustainable and makes sense for her business, echoing what we heard from entrepreneurs across the board. So again, these results in terms of improving businesses' bottom lines really added up, and the results are truly remarkable. So across 81 alumni businesses, Food Lab helped business owners secure over 8.2 million in grants and loans. 70% of businesses increased their revenue, and they created or sustained 478 jobs, really lifting up their entire communities. And the effects of Food Lab ripple far beyond these individual businesses. They extend to the broader culinary sector and the neighborhood economy. So between 2018 and 2023, the number of culinary businesses in Greater Chatham grew by 19%, nearly 4 times the citywide average. And these gains reflect how Food Lab is embedded within the Greater Chatham Initiative's placekeeping strategy. So public art, murals, and activations like Mahalia Jackson Court have created these visible shared spaces where community identity and commerce reinforce one another. And so we also saw measurable results in terms of these activations. So activations at Mahalia Jackson Court were associated with a 28% increase in foot traffic and a corresponding rise in local spending. And we also look at culinary density. So essentially how many food establishments operate per 1,000 residents. So this is a simple but powerful indicator of corridor vitality. And it shows us that this growth isn't just about, business growth as a function of population growth. This is a really prominent phenomenon. So between 2018 and 2023, with 2023 being the most recent year for which data are available from the US Census Bureau, over this period, Greater Chatham's culinary density grew by 18% overall, with Chatham growing by 24%, as shown here, 5 times the citywide average. And Greater Chatham corridors, which are shown in the dark green bars here, are now rivaling or approaching established cultural corridors like Bronzeville, shown here in Douglas at 24%, Little Village, shown here in South Lawndale at 14%, and approaching Chinatown and Armour Square, which grew by 34% over the same period. And then we also, wanted to make sure this wasn't about, other neighborhood characteristics. So even after controlling for a broad range of community, demographics and, baseline business characteristics and restaurant saturation, we found that Greater Chatham neighborhoods experienced a 16-point increase relative to other neighborhoods, and in a model that was highly statistically significant. And we also see from this chart that growth was strongest where GCI, or the Greater Chatham Initiative, sustained engagement. So in the corridors with the most active segments of 75th Street and 79th Street here in these bars, we see greater growth, while areas with lighter investment like Avalon Park here saw less growth. So this contrast really highlights how sustained place-based support drives durable gains. And behind these numbers are leaders like Stephanie Hart of Brown Sugar Bakery. Her expansion into this factory didn't just grow her business, it also inspired others. So as Stephanie puts it, our growth inspired other business owners to get involved because the results are clear. This program has steadily improved food businesses in our community, and that progress has helped elevate the entire neighborhood. So in closing, Food Lab shows that place-based, culturally grounded programs don't just help individual businesses grow, they strengthen corridors, they preserve heritage, and they reshape narratives of economic prosperity. It's also a practical model for inclusive growth that other neighborhoods or cities can adapt to build community wealth from within. And for those who'd like to dig deeper, AEO and GCI will be releasing a full report on Food Lab Chicago later this fall. And it will include the data we shared today, along with detailed, more details and stories from participating entrepreneurs, highlighting lessons for other cities investing in culture-based corridor development. And we'll make this report publicly available on our websites once it's live. And now, to round out the picture, we're thrilled to be joined by Robin Neuberger from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, whose recent analysis looks at neighborhood vitality and restaurant corridors citywide, including Greater Chatham. With that, I'll hand it over to Robin to share findings and how they connect to what we're seeing on the ground.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lori. I am going to talk about some work that I and my colleague Maud Toussaint-Comeau have been doing, looking at foot traffic recovery to eating and drinking establishments in some neighborhoods of Chicago. So we can start with our disclaimer, our next slide here. So I'm very happy to be here today as part of this conversation. So I'm Robin Neuberger. I'm a policy advisor in the Community Development Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And in CD, I'll just give you a little sense of it. So we conduct outreach and research to understand economic conditions in low and moderate income communities. And we participate and organize in convenings and roundtables and webinars such as this to share our findings. So I have to include my disclaimer here that this presentation represents my views and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago or the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. We always have to say that. So moving along. So what do we ask? Let's look at our next slide. So what do we ask in our study? So in our study, we're looking at patterns in foot traffic to eating and drinking establishments for the select neighborhoods of Chicago, and those are listed on this slide. So this is like a case study of 5 neighborhoods, and they each have these distinct food scenes. And so as we've heard, there's Greater Chatham, which is predominantly a Black neighborhood. There's 2 predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods, that's South Lawndale and the Lower West Side, which is Little Village and Pilsen, more colloquially known. There's the neighborhood of West Ridge, which is a very ethnically diverse neighborhood that has a lot of South Asian cuisine also. And then there's Chicago's Chinatown, which is Armour Square. So those are what we're looking at. And we're looking at the data to get a better understanding of whether restaurants are a big draw of foot traffic in these neighborhoods and how foot traffic responded during the pandemic and after the pandemic. And we're looking at how patterns compare to sort of restaurant corridors in these neighborhoods versus the overall community. And I just should also say that these are neighborhoods that, as we heard from Marcia, are middle neighborhoods. These are 40% of these neighborhoods people in these neighborhoods earn more than $50,000 a year. A quarter of people in these neighborhoods earn more than $75,000 a year. So these are middle neighborhoods. And we're looking at, in addition, we're looking at whether we can see mobility trends in neighborhoods that may have helped with foot traffic recovery. So in our next slide, I just want to preview what we find broadly. So foot traffic, we find to eating and drinking establishments, it is an important part of visits to neighborhoods. We see that it looks like foot traffic to restaurants was recovering after the pandemic. And we see that after the pandemic, visitors to restaurants and bars were coming from greater distances to the neighborhoods in our study. So let's look at the next slide at the data that we use for our analysis. And we're looking at data from the Advan research. This is data that the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago purchases. And this is data that draws on an anonymous sample of participants who are identified through their cell phone apps of where they are, their geolocation data. And our analysis is looking at the years 2019 to 2023. And I should say this is not perfect data. I don't have time to kind of, we can talk about it or another time or double back, but this is not perfect data. There are overcounts and undercounts, so I just want to acknowledge that. But this is a very helpful data set because it's very granular. All right, so that's the data that we're using for foot traffic. So let's go to our findings. So our first finding is that restaurants are a consistent and increasing source of visitor traction in the neighborhoods for our study. So looking at the slide on the left, so for most of the neighborhoods that we're looking at, as a share of all the places that people visit in a neighborhood, we see a rise in the share of visits going to restaurants and bars beginning in 2023 after the pandemic. So for example, in Greater Chatham, about 10% of foot traffic goes to these establishments. At least in 2023. In South Lawndale, that was about 11%. In Chinatown and Armour Square, that's like between 27, 28, 29% of all foot traffic is going to restaurants in that neighborhood. And we look at the slide on the right. This slide gives some context as to what types of establishments that there are in each neighborhood that people are visiting. So as I said, these are neighborhoods with different kinds of food notoriety, different kinds of cuisine and sort of reputations for food. But in each neighborhood, we see that there's a mix of establishment. There's both full service restaurants and limited service restaurants and snack shops. So there's a diversity in the types of establishments that are in each neighborhood. There's like 60% of the restaurants in Greater Chatham are considered full service restaurants. That's the same in some other neighborhoods. 70% of establishments in Chinatown are full service restaurants, but we also see some differences across neighborhoods. We also see, like in Greater Chatham, there are more limited service restaurants where people pay before eating. And this difference in the composition of restaurants can affect potentially what happened during the pandemic in terms of foot traffic and what's happened after the pandemic. So just thinking about where people are going and what types of restaurants are going to could also influence what we're seeing in our foot traffic results. So our next finding is, next slide. We're looking at a chart that shows how foot traffic responded during the pandemic and the aftermath. So if we can advance to the next slide. Well, I think we're having a technical difficulty here. So the slide that we would be looking at is a slide of index visits to restaurants. There we are. Okay, so what are we showing here? So we construct an index of foot traffic counts that normalizes for what was happening before the pandemic in 2019. So we're going to show an index rather than actual count, given, as I was saying earlier, that there's limitations to actually interpreting the very numbers as the raw numbers. So I think rather than using that, we prefer to do an index so we can measure kind of change over time. And what we're seeing here is this index, that's the y axis we're looking at. So this is the change from level 1. And 1 is, again, kind of normalized as an average of what the foot traffic was in 2019. So what we see during the pandemic period is that visits to restaurants and bars fell by about 90% when officials suspended consumption at food and drink, on-premise food and drink between March and April 2020. And we can see that visits to Armour Square in Chinatown plummeted by about that same rate. Whereas in other neighborhoods like Greater Chatham, it sustained a smaller hit. It was a drop of about 55% during the initial hit of the pandemic. And then we see in the recovery in this index, we also see some differences with some of the neighborhoods moving towards more recovery than others. For example, in 2023, in the Lower West Side and the South Lawndale areas, these are both the largely Hispanic populations, there was generally a recovery of foot traffic to pre-pandemic levels. In Westridge, similarly, we have a mix of restaurants there. And in Greater Chatham, we do see a return relative to the pandemic, not quite at the levels from prior to the pandemic. And in Chinatown and Armour Square, we see more bouncing around, more ups and downs. So that's what we're seeing in terms of where foot traffic has gone during and post the pandemic up to 2023. And in the next slide, our findings, we wanted to take a look at these trends, not just along generally in the neighborhood, but along specific restaurant corridors that we define within the community. And why do we want to do that? Because the commercial activity in the broader corridor may not always be completely integrated with the whole neighborhood. So it may be that there's specific dynamics happening along a corridor, a particular restaurant corridor, or maybe that there's an economic development strategy that's targeting a specific place that's more precise in the corridor that's not elsewhere in the community, and as we've just heard about. So what we see is directionally in many of the neighborhoods, the foot traffic recovery does tend to mirror the neighborhood more generally, which is suggesting some kind of more integration between these foot traffic trends in the community and the corridor. But interestingly, in Greater Chatham, we see a divergence. We see foot traffic recovered more, for example, in this area on 75th Street, what we're calling Restaurant Row, which may be evidence of the type of investment and resources that have been put into supporting the restaurants in the neighborhood. So that's in that area. So that's consistent with that investment that's been made. And in Armour Square, we don't see a consistent foot traffic recovery. And there's also a lot of explanations that could be behind these numbers. For example, there may be more use of technology and delivery services, and that may be more prevalent in Chinatown, for example. So there's a lot of unpacking to do behind the numbers, but the idea is that we're looking at whether there are specific corridors that may be trending differently than the broader neighborhood. Okay, and the next finding, this is my last finding. So we have two charts here. So we're going to look on the left. This is to say that visitor distances increased to specialty restaurants after the pandemic. So we have two charts here. So on the left, we're looking at how far visitors travel to eating and drinking establishments in the neighborhoods of our study. So the x-axis is time and the y-axis is miles. So the median is the 50th percentile of distances traveled. And what do we see? We see in some communities like South Lawndale or Little Village, visitor distance tends to be quite low, ranging between 1 and 2 miles, suggesting that many visitors live close to these establishments that they're frequenting. And in other neighborhoods like Chinatown and Armour Square, the median distance is much higher, like 3 to 6 miles. And on the chart on the right, what we're looking at is annually, we're combining this data to look at pre-pandemic in 2019, during the pandemic in 20 and 21, and then post-pandemic in the green bars in 2023. And we're comparing the distance traveled to restaurants that we identify as either fast food restaurants or specialty places. Specialty places are the restaurants that reflect the particular food culture of that neighborhood. And we're seeing as an increase in distance traveled after the pandemic to restaurants that have that specialty food culture. So especially that traditional food culture. So for example, half the restaurants that in Little Village, for example, in South Lawndale, they're serving Latin American related cuisine, and that's what we're calling the specialty food culture. So that's what we want to show from this slide, I think, in our short amount of time. And just to summarize my results, I think I'm at my time here. So to summarize what we see in this analysis, we generally see a recovery to pre-pandemic foot traffic, if not in the neighborhood overall, then in a corridor in that neighborhood. And we see people traveling farther distances to specifically to specialty restaurants that serve the traditional cuisine of the neighborhood. So I wanted to acknowledge that our analysis is in this 2019 to 2023 timeframe, and obviously new issues have arisen in that time that affect foot traffic, and I think that we're going to hear more about that in the panel discussion that's following. So I'm going to turn this over to Marcia. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Let's see, I did unmute myself, so let me get rid of that little sign. So hi again, everyone. I am going to moderate this panel, and we are lucky to have with us two practitioners today who will be talking about the challenges, the opportunities, the strategies they actually employ to get these kind of results. And we also have with us Kristen Wiggins, who is a funder, who's funded these business district initiatives as well as some others, and could give us sort of an overview of themes that she's seen and what she thinks the big takeaways are. So I think I want to start with the practitioners and just have you reintroduce yourself, Nidra and Sarah, and give us a little sense of what your business district is like and what the importance of the food sector is to your business district. So I think we'll start with Sarah. You want to go ahead, Sarah?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to AEO for having me. My name is Sarah Tang. I'm the Director for Programs at the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community. We're a nonprofit based in Chicago's Chinatown. So our business district is a really vibrant immigrant enclave that not only provides the city of Chicago a gateway to various Asian cuisines, but also a great way to experience the history of Chinese in America. So the current Chinatown has been at the Wentworth, Cermak, and Archer intersections, an area for over 112 years. Our three main corridors are Wentworth, or some call Old Chinatown, Cermak Road, and Chinatown Square, which runs along Archer Avenue. So the food industry is especially important to Chinatown because it's actually a primary way that Chinese immigrants found a way of livelihood in the US after the gold rush. So a lot of immigrants turned to the restaurant industry to make a life for themselves. And in today's Chinatown, you can really experience a variety of Chinese cuisines that actually really reflect the hometown of Chinese immigrants throughout different times of history. So you'll see traditional Chinese Cantonese dim sum restaurants and Chinese American food that reflect the current, Chinese experience in America, to like Sichuan hot pot and more Fujianese and Hunanese food that currently reflect the current wave of immigrants as well. So the food sector, I would say, is really a lifeblood of Chinatown, where a lot of the cuisines that I mentioned provide a place where immigrants can feel like home, but also provide tourists and other Chicagoans a way to experience Chinese and larger Asian cuisine. So we also have a variety of other Asian cuisines like Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese that really attract tourists to our area. So yeah, happy to be here. And the food industry really is a main driver of our economy and really define our district and the ability to capture a consistent audience, but also reflect the history of migration.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. As I mentioned when we were prepping for this, this neighborhood was the first time I, as a person who basically lived in a rural community, downstate Illinois, had, it was the most international place I'd ever been when I was in college, and I got to go have dinner in Chinatown. So it has a special place in my heart. So Nidra, would you like to do the same? I know you started to do a little bit of that in your earlier remarks, but um, maybe you could delve a little more deeply into how achieving a critical mass of restaurants in your district and food-related businesses has really changed things for you.
Okay, thank you, Marcia, and thank you, Sarah. I just want to do a shout out to Kristen, who's here. She has been really a champion. She at Chicago Community Trust and We Rise Together really jumped in with both feet and arms to help stabilize our communities during COVID, and really took a critical eye on how to what investments needed to be done on a corridor, and then did the unusual task of analyzing what impact those investments had after the ribbon cutting, to see how that money's flowed through. And it's really through her leadership and analysis that we've been playing, kind of report tag on understanding what's going on in our corridors, because the reason why we at Greater Chatham Initiative has been working on this food lab, we've been doing this for 7 cohorts now, and we do this and because we want to know, is what we're doing, is it working? Is it moving the needle? Is it helping our businesses? Is it stabilizing our corridors? And so we are really excited to have this report from AEO to show that, yes, our business support, our scientific methods work, but it also has helped stabilize and grow our corridors, which is beyond what we thought. But we're really pleased that that is the finding, because we believe that what we do is rooted in our communities. All our communities are different, and we want to make sure what we're doing is going to work in our community, and that also how we can kind of scale and replicate it so that other communities, both ethnic and racial enclaves, and other communities that are rooted in business districts, can know what to do to get it to work. I think of AEO did, talked about some of our restaurants. And when we first started, most of our restaurant tours, they do what we call checkbook accounting, which means that they run it out of their checkbook. And to get them to go to have financial statements so that they really understand, are they making money? And that is such a big fundamental switch, but it's so important in order to stabilize the restaurants. And once they know how to do that, you can really see their growth in both their stabilization and also that they get capital and they're able to grow. And so the business support is really key, but also the pride that they have in being in a food district and being able to make a difference, and to think long-term about how do we create generational wealth. Those are the kinds of things that are embedded in both food lab, but also in now how to think about what's next for them, their families, and their communities. So thank you.
Thanks, Nidra. That was a great shout out to turn things over to Kristen as well. So Kristen, you had the opportunity as a funder to observe, several. In fact, why don't you tell us how many business districts you've been investing in and kind of why you thought it was important to invest in them?
Yeah, so we at the Community Trust of Chicago Community Trust galvanized a group of 160 funders during COVID to start We Rise Together. And the goal of We Rise Together was to help foster more equitable economic recovery. We know that our communities where there's a large minority population frequently have a more intense recession, economic recession, when the country has a recession. And we wanted to think about what kinds of support it would take for those communities to recover more quickly than they have in previous recessionary situations. So we partnered with community leaders like Nidra, folks on the West Side and other parts of the South Side. And we made a series of investments. First, we weren't just going for restaurants. I'll say we've funded a couple, we did capital grants in a couple of restaurants, but we did capital grants. And around those capital grants, we asked, okay, what does a small business landscape look like? And what does the worker landscape look like? So how do we support all these different components of a local economy? And those tend to cluster on a commercial corridor, right? So you can put a building there, but then what are the other what are the other businesses that are around there that help when the foot traffic increases and people come into their house? Where can they spend money if now they're coming to a community center or a health center or a job center or a restaurant? Let's try to create some other places where they can also spend. So that's how we crafted our strategy. And we did over 40 real estate investments. But we also made close to 20 investments in business serving organizations like Nidra's to help folks foster the businesses that were in their communities in those same places where there was a capital investment. So I don't have the exact number of corridors that we've invested in, but it's quite a few around Chicago.
Right, right. Yeah, it's just it's really hitting me as sort of an outsider to Chicago and observing what you guys have been saying about these business districts, that it's a marvelous win-win situation to both really invest in a community, but in a way that celebrates the unique culture of that community and actually is able to leverage that value into something that just really blows away any other technique to advance, foot traffic and everything else. That's what really excites me about this. So I wonder if Nidra and Sarah, you could go back a little bit and think over the last 5 years and give us a sense of the challenges that your business districts were facing, and in particular, the food sectors of your business district. So we know what it was that you were trying to correct for, strengthen, et cetera, as you employed your strategies, which we'll talk about in a minute. So Sarah, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, of course. When we think about 5 years ago, of course, comes to mind is the COVID-19 pandemic. And that the pandemic really, really hit a lot of our restaurants really hard, especially not just because people stopped going out to eat, but because there was a really big wave of anti-Asian hate during that time. So not only was it, coupled with the pandemic, but also that sentiment of like anti-Chinese animosity was really felt by a lot of our businesses and restaurants. So at the time, we really came together as a community and helped a lot of our businesses access, PPP loans and the SBA's Restaurant Revitalization Fund. And it's also during the time where the issue of our businesses not accessing different grants and programs and affordable loans on a regular basis really showed that they had a really small margin and a small, buffer between closing. And so we realized, that the language barrier is a huge challenge for our business community. A lot of them are not native English speakers. Maybe they rely on their children to help them with some of this paperwork and applications, but we can't rely on, always having that access. So that's where we really realized the importance of investing in that assistance for our business community. So I'll talk more about that later in the strategy piece, but once Chinatown kind of bounced back from COVID, a lot of the mom and pop shops that closed left storefronts that actually became really unaffordable and expensive. And a lot of those restaurants were replaced by chains that are coming from, international franchises from Asia. So that made the landscape of like competition really unattainable for a lot of local entrepreneurs. And it made Chinatown really increasingly more commercialized. And so a lot of our local business owners turned to other areas with high amounts of Chinese residents to open their businesses. So we saw kind of a drain of local entrepreneurs to other areas and kind of this commercialization of Chinatown core. But that, over, I think in the last 3 years when we were recovering, now our community is hit by another kind of crises with the threat of immigration enforcement. Folks are really afraid of going out, especially, in our area where there's a high concentration of immigrant community. So not only are residents staying home, but we are seeing that tourists and visitors from other part of the city are not coming as much. A lot of our businesses are telling me that they feel like another hit within 5 years of the pandemic is really very daunting. And especially coupled with the recent wave of tariffs also imposed on a lot of our businesses' needs of materials and ingredients. A lot of them are seeing their costs skyrocket, but also feel like because they want to retain their customers, the ones that they do have, they feel that they can't really raise their prices, and the economy is bad overall, and people are feeling that need of like pinching pennies and saving, and they don't want to raise any prices to drive away any loyal customers. So again, it's another wave of challenges currently, and unfortunately, with the last 5 years with multiple hits to our community, we're really hearing businesses really feeling threatened in their livelihood again.
Yeah, there's business districts always have a tough row to hoe. There's many different factors that influence them, both at the really local level and the national and even international level. Nidra, what has been your experience in your business district? And I wonder if you might touch on sort of the worker population too.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, for that. That was very illuminating, and I'm just so sorry that your community is experiencing the tariffs and the ICE raids. So our community, it is predominantly Black descendants from the Great Migration, but we do have a good portion of folks that are from the Caribbean and West Africa who also live here. What we saw during COVID was really a couple of things. One, that it was, in some ways, it was beneficial that a good chunk of our businesses are takeout restaurants. And so the businesses weren't hit as hard by COVID because they were takeout restaurants. The other thing that happened at the exact same time is really the fundamental change in the restaurant industry with having online order and delivery. And so we really pivoted to help restaurants get to the digital age, to have websites, online ordering, deliveries, and that is what really allowed the restaurants to stabilize and not to close. And so that was a really significant feat. We also have folks that are kind of not as digitally literate, people who want to run their businesses off a phone. And so just really providing them the support that they need. And what we saw with the Food Lab program, with the cohort model, that if one person said, I got a PPP loan from XYZ Bank, they would say, well, if they did it, we could do it as well. And so we had bankers work with our folks, and they would stay up till 11 p.m., 1 a.m. getting their applications in, and most people were successful. And we were able to introduce them to the right banker until it actually got done. So everyone who wanted a PPP loan were able to get them. And so it was almost like, Black people were promised after Civil War, 10 acres and a mural. And this was the first time where there really was a level playing field that people could go and get the PPP loans, and they were really significant. to help people stay in business, but it was very challenging because what we found was that people, the workers there, they were really scared of COVID, and for good reason. We were one of the epicenters for COVID deaths. I know many people personally who died from COVID, and so it was really a stark reminder of being that essential worker, that what risks that had, and also with the reality that in Chicago, we have really strong minimum wages. And so I think we're up to maybe $19. Maybe then during COVID, we were at $17 an hour. But the reality was most of the restaurants did not provide health insurance. And so people were really scared. And so what we saw was a significant decline in the number of people who wanted to work in the restaurant industry because the risks that they were taking were not commensurate with the compensation and the lack of health benefits. And so to this day, we are still seeing that where people just are foregoing going into the restaurant industry. And so it is really a significant challenge to get restaurant workers to come back. And so there's kind of chronic understaffing. So I would say that that is one of the outcomes. The other is that we found also, Sarah, that restaurants were very reluctant to increase their pricing. And so what we've done systemically is to do a neighborhood scan of what our top, let's say 25 dishes are in the neighborhood, and we share that information with them so that they can see that if they're at the lower price or the highest price or in the middle, and that once they saw what the competition was, what the landscape was, they became much more confident in raising their prices, knowing that what their peers were charging. And so providing that scan of the landscape is really important and empowering. I think of what one of our chefs from Chef T from, trying to think of his name, he said, I thought Pookie couldn't afford it, and then I saw Pookie was, eating in Bronzeville, spending real money, so Pookie could. And so just providing that information really opened their eyes so that they could charge what they need and deserve in order to be viable enterprises. Because at the end of the day, our motto in Food Lab Chicago, if every plate is profitable, then you'll be profitable. And that is what has to be done over and over and over again, because what I saw, the biggest shift that I saw was we had restaurateurs that they would take their income and expenses and give it to their accountant and wait for their accountant to tell them if they made money or not. It was like a black box, where instead being able to show them how they could be planful and they could decide what they were going to make, made all the difference and really empowered them. And drawing back that curtain really allowed them to be in control of their own destiny as much as you can in this very thin margin industry.
Yeah, thanks, Nidra. Kristen, you've had the opportunity to observe multiple different business districts. Do you see these same themes that Sarah and Nidra have been talking about playing out in other places? Do you see other themes in terms of the challenges these districts face and continue to face? You're muted, though. Yeah.
I came
There you
off and then I somehow re-hit it again. I think one of the real benefits of doing a really large effort is that we can compare across regions. And so we've had a couple of really important learnings when we look across all the different places that we funded. Some of the early learnings were that the red tape was just getting in the way, and we've worked really closely with the city and some other advocacy groups to start raising up not individual problems with red tape, but thematic issues with red tape across multiple projects. And that has gotten the city's attention to start thinking about what they can do to reduce barriers for businesses. So that was really important to do across regions and not just one-off businesses. We also were realizing that a lot of our businesses who were getting fantastic coaching were getting stuck when it came to getting to capital. They didn't have, you can make a great meal, but if you don't have a bank account and you haven't paid your taxes, you can't get the loan you need to grow or to stabilize your business. And so we're really starting to think about supporting the BSOs around the city with more sophisticated training around accessing capital for small businesses, so that they can start building out a better runway onto the capital platform earlier with the businesses that they're coaching. And then Nidra made an allusion to this, where we've been sort of like data swapping. She's working on one very specific corridor, but we're working across the city. We've been working with MasterCard to measure the impact of the real estate investments we've done. And what we're seeing is that when those real estate investments overlap with the half-mile impact areas overlap, we're seeing 4 times the amount of economic impact that you would see in a similar community without investment. If you make one investment, you see about a 50% increase in economic income, or economic activity. When you make that second investment, you see it go 4 times. And that's really powerful about how it's not just working with individual businesses, right, or individual projects. It's about starting to knit them together in proximity so that you're driving foot traffic, you're making it a destination. I think a lot of what Sarah and Nidra do to create a cultural cohesion also leads that. I mean, I don't know, we all maybe took economics in college at one point, and they said, like, if you have a lemonade stand, you actually want to put your lemonade stand next to the other one, and it creates, a destination of lemonade stands. But we really are seeing the data support that. And that's why I think this more emerging work on the corridors and what those corridors bring and how they can build off of each other is really important for community development. We don't have enough resources to do every project, so we've got to start thinking about putting them in proximity to one another so we get the biggest bang for our buck for our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think that's a really good callback to Econ 101 or whatever it was. Yeah. And it's what I think has always been so exciting to me about neighborhood business districts in the food sector is if you can start to clump those things together. As Nidra said, I'm fine with there being another jerk chicken place now. Now I know that's a good thing, that it all starts to, it's almost an exponential leverage of results, as you were describing, Kristen. So let's move into the fun part. Let's talk about the strategies that Sarah and Nidra, that you have employed over the last 5 years. What do you think has really worked for you to overcome or at least mitigate some of the challenges that your businesses are facing? Sarah, you want to go?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, the language barrier really is a really high hurdle for a lot of our business owners who maybe don't have that capacity. And a lot of our business owners, after work, they're not maybe necessarily Googling what's out there for programs and grants and, affordable loans. So we really made that barrier to access these opportunities, you eradicated it. So we were able to really form a great resource network to share in language with our business owners, to really explain what's going on, what's available, what entities out there are out there supporting businesses and how to access those things. Because we realize that a lot of these programs are just promoted in English and maybe sometimes Spanish, but certainly not Chinese. So we're happy to be able to, be that bridge for our businesses to see, and even just being aware of these opportunities is actually very empowering for them. I think a lot of immigrant or business owners feel very alone in their journey to success, and sometimes feel like there's not really anyone else out there looking out for them. But just knowing that there are, the city, it has programs, there's some philanthropic partners that have programs, and the city and the state has like affordable loan programs that they can access. So we're there to provide those resources, help them with any application, and helping them with that English piece to finish an application and get to the finish line. And so that's one of our main driving forces. And by being able to communicate with them regularly, we're also, really establishing trust. For Chinatown, I think one of the things that we're most concerned about is more and more residential serving businesses getting priced out. So we want to kind of have an eye on what businesses might be thinking about retiring or closing. And instead of, vacating their space and closing up a beloved business, we want to see if there's opportunities for others to come in and take over or purchase the business, so that residents can continue to enjoy their products, their food, whatever it might be. It might be a grocery shop, but these are really vital things for our residents to feel like they have what they need in their immediate neighborhood, to really have the food that they want to access at a price point where they can access that. So we're hoping that the trust that we're building with our business network can really get us there shortly. And one of the other things that we found is important is also early intervention for new businesses. So a lot of our business owners we're seeing maybe beyond Chinatown, but in other areas that have high concentrations of Chinese residents, they're not understanding kind of the different kind of goalposts or milestones you need to hit before you can open a restaurant. So like with the city's permitting or licensing processes, it might be hard for a new business owner to understand how long that might really take. So then they end up locking themselves in a lease that might be, not favorable for their process of waiting on these processes. So we're seeing that kind of providing intervention early on and providing, consultation and legal support to help them review leases to see what they might be locking themselves into is helpful, so that they don't, drain their capital before they even open. So that's one of the other things that we found to be really helpful in our area as well. Yeah, and then in 2024, we were part of a city program that aimed to fill vacant storefronts along with Greater Chatham initiative. So in that program, we opened 2 business incubators in Chinatown and gave some really small business, like entrepreneurs and artisans, a place in the neighborhood to sell their products. And the program really showed that providing subsidies early on in an entrepreneur's journey to opening a storefront is really, really meaningful and gave them a much higher chance to succeed. For the people that we worked with, 2 of them now they have their own space. And so that program has ended now, but we're, continuing to explore what opportunities there might be to revitalize that program, so we can be able to be there for businesses at the earliest stages to really help them cushion and be set up for success. So that's a strategy that's ongoing. We're looking at how to, bring that back to the area, especially as I mentioned earlier, that commercial rent is becoming more unaffordable. But, Chinatown is still a destination where a lot of AAPI entrepreneurs want to have a space to call their own. So we're continuing to look towards that as well.
That's really, really interesting. It's kind of occurred to me listening to you and Nidra talk. I'm more in the housing side of neighborhood strategy than I am in business districts more often. And of course, if you're in the housing sector, helping people become homeowners is a really big deal. And there are all of these on-ramps to that. But I'm starting to think, Nidra, that you were talking about some of the kind of financial education that you were doing with your businesses, which there is a counterpart to that in the housing world, which is financial literacy that then helps you go to the next level of home buyer education and buying a home. And I hadn't really thought before about how there is that equivalent in businesses as well. And it's not just about people who are thinking about opening a business. It's about people who have businesses and have had them for several years. So why don't you talk more about the strategies that have worked for you over the last 5 years?
Sure. So we have So again, I think it goes back to kind of that, some folks had what I call that pre-black box that, they didn't know whether they were going to make money. And if you don't know if you're going to make money, you certainly aren't going to want to buy your business. And by the building that your business is located in. But it's really important to have that business, because we found during COVID, those businesses that owned their business, they had longer staying power. They weren't up to that landlord that Sarah's talking about, who's jacking up the rent and they can no longer afford it. And so one of the things that we did with the PPP loans were really great, because it showed people that getting money from lenders was actually possible, and teaching them the skills of how to complete an application, what kind of supporting documents that you need. And once those folks were successful, they were out the gate and they were applying and getting everything once they cracked the code. And then what we saw were people were buying the buildings that they had rented. They were buying the buildings and owning the buildings. And so really creating generational wealth. And one of the great stories, Lori Smith talked about, Stephanie Hart, who's a baker, known for her great cakes and cupcakes. And she had outgrown her 75th Street storefront, and she really needed a manufacturing company where she could expand and create so many more cakes and cupcakes. And so we were able to identify another business that was going, a guy who was retiring, and connect Stephanie with them so that she could buy the building. And so it allowed her to create her factory now. And so she's now, and it also happened to be a chocolate tier factory. And so now she's the third largest Black chocolatier in the United States. And Kristen, Chicago Community Trust, was really important in helping her leverage that so that she could buy it. And so just opening up the opportunities and possibilities, and really having those conversations about what does generational wealth looks like, because we had early people in our cohort that didn't own a home. And so being able to go to those milestones of being able to own a home and then have that stability, so then they can think about owning their the building that their restaurant or bodega is operating out of, really helps stabilize the corridor, so that you're not going to get this churn because people own it. So I would say that's really important. And again, using that cohort model to say, okay, if they were able to do it, then I'm going to be able to do it. And that was really important. Sarah brought up the trust, and that's one of the things that she and I both are place-based community and economic development organizations. So we've been working with these organizations, these businesses, for 10 years. They know us. They know that we're not going anywhere, that their interest is our interest, because their success is our neighborhood and our corridor success. And so they trust us that we are going to be around, and we work with them. And so that's really important. The other is that we do have 2 cultural corridors that are really strong. I want to say that overall in Greater Chatham, from again the research that we learned, that after downtown, for people who live on the south side, Chatham is where they come and shop. We have 2 major shopping centers at 87th and Lafayette, with a Home Depot and a Lowe's and a Jewel Osco grocery store and others. And so a lot of people come there to shop, and then they move from that those shopping centers to eat and experience what's on the corridors. And so having that kind of retail nexus is really good because that's what we're known for. And then to have those corridors. So 79th Street which is Mahalia's Mile, which is named after Mahalia Jackson, a legendary gospel singer, and just strengthening that corridor by adding murals. And what we found through the research of Hae-Sung Jung, who's a University of Cincinnati professor, that she found that you get 5 times more foot traffic in a neighborhood when you have 10 or more food-based businesses within a small node, let's say 3 or 4 blocks. And we have found that to be true when we look at 75th Street, where we have over 11 food-based businesses along what we affectionately call Restaurant Row, which is roughly at 75th and King Drive, that they have over 3 million people come and visit. And they shop. So there's and it's also where there's not only are they great restaurants, but they are nationally known restaurants that 2 of them have been, one received the James Beard Award, one was nominated for a James Beard Award, and people are really loyal and they come and they patronize them. And we found that people come from within a 25-mile radius to eat at those restaurants. And so people really want authentic ethnic cuisine in the places where those, where the, where Black people live, and they come here. And so having those corridors and judging up those corridors with murals, what Professor Hae-Sung Jung from the University of Cincinnati found was that when you add murals to a corridor where they have those businesses, people stay longer because they're looking at the murals, and when they stay longer, they spend more money and they eat. And so it becomes a really virtuous cycle. What we also found was on 75th Street, it hasn't taken Restaurant Row, it has not taken the hit. COVID was really devastating to our corridors. A lot of businesses went out of business, and so our corridor vacancy increased to about 45% for our storefronts, but that is not true in Restaurant Row, where we have, again, more than 10 businesses, food-based businesses within a 4-block area, that they actually have a 81% occupancy rate, and that we actually have landlords that fix up the buildings because there's demand for those storefronts, and so they invest in the buildings, and so it becomes really this very virtuous cycle. And so that's what I would say probably the biggest takeaway that I found in doing this work is that food-based businesses are really vital because you may buy a pair of shoes once a year, but you're going to feed yourself 3 times a day, every day, and you're going to patronize those food-based businesses. So the food-based businesses are core to making our corridors thrive.
Yeah, that's really has come through powerfully to me. If I were going to invest in anything right now in a neighborhood strategy, it would be, to find what those unique cultural aspects are in that community and really try and play them out through food if that's possible. So, Kristen, what do you think are the takeaways from what you've observed in terms of strategies overall that you've help to fund the organizations that have employed, and what do you think might be replicable somewhere else?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is, as Nidra talked about, I think starting to think about how to transform these from successful businesses into wealth creation machines through owning businesses and taking control of the real estate. The trust runs something called the pre-development fund that helps small businesses and entrepreneurs and nonprofits work through the costs associated with the early stages of developing a business. And I think that that's really important. We want to make sure that we're not just getting these businesses to be stable, but we're really helping those entrepreneurs sort of seed the next generation of wealth and stability. I think the grouping and layering of projects together on corridors is really important. I'm going to share, I've shared the really exciting data, like when you put 2 or more large projects together, we get 4 times the data. One of the things, though, that we're going to all need to be paying attention to is what Sarah talked a little bit about, which is in Chicago, where we have very racially targeted law enforcement happening, we're seeing a massive decrease in economic foot traffic and spend. And it cannot be understated that in addition to the human toll of the ICE raids, we're really looking at some very serious economic impacts in our neighborhoods. And so we're going to have to think about having built these beautifully culturally rich nodes that attract lots of visitors. What are we going to do when those places are targeted for that very richness? So I just want to encourage folks to, this is a really good news story. Nidra, I hadn't ever heard about the mural data before. I'm like scribbling over here on the mural data for us. But, I think it's not rocket science. When you make something both beautiful and exciting and like a travel experience, it is exciting. I mean, I bring my kids to Chinatown every year as like one of our outings, and it's one of their favorite things to do. And so we want to keep building that up in these sort of multiple ways, right? It's the business piece, it's the food piece, it's the costing piece, it's also the art piece, it's business ownership. So, not it's taking there's no silver bullet. I think what's really powerful about what Nidra and Sarah do is this sort of place-based, really leaning in, listening to what's next, right? You hear from both of them. It's not like we're just doing X. It's like, well, we're doing X until we find out that Y is needed. And then we're going to figure out how to do Y. And then when the next thing is Z, we're going to figure that out too, because you guys are so well positioned to listen to your business leaders, to your residents. I mean, I really think I have found that following leaders like Nidra and Sarah, that's really, that's how you can make successful strategy when you're a funder, because I'm not on the ground and they're going to be the ones hearing that. And then, giving them the resources and nudging them towards the grouping, and then being there when things go sideways because of factors outside of their control. So I don't know if that was super helpful of the strategy, but I think, as a funder, we need to make sure we're always listening to what's on the leading edge of what our communities need, and partners like Nidra and Sarah are the way to go.
I think that's a really great way to put it. Before we take a couple of questions, I just want to do very quick hits because we're running out of time. But Sarah and Nidra, I was made aware as we prep for this that it's not that the food sectors in your neighborhood business districts don't just benefit your neighborhoods, they benefit the entire city. Could you give us just a couple of quick points about that, Sarah?
Yeah, so I think, Chinatowns all over the country, is disappearing really fast. And really in the Midwest, Chicago is the growing Chinatown. So for the city of Chicago, I think it really is such a great drive for tourism. We're so close and accessible from downtown. But I think what's important about the kind of the vibrancy of Chinatown is that if our businesses are thriving, that means our community is thriving. People have places to work, places to eat, and places to really feel like they can be home. So we're not only a tourist destination, but we really are a port of entry for a lot of immigrants. So you'll see restaurants lined up, but then in between there's nonprofits that are helping folks adjust to life in America. So I think, for the Chinese, we've been in Chicago since the late 1870s, and we've been here for a long time, and we'll be here for a long time. So I think, the food scene really helps drive our community forward and provide opportunity for newcomers and long-term residents alike.
Yeah, Nidra.
Some similarities to Chinatown. Black people came to Chicago in the Great Migration in the 1920s. They lived in the Black Belt, which was Bronzeville, and then urban renewal happened and Bronzeville emptied out. And so they moved further south to what is now Greater Chatham. And when we look at the economic impact, as I said, over 3 million people come and eat along our corridors, and that we found that we are actually more people come and eat in our communities. And so they come from our neighborhoods just around Chatham, so South Shore and Pullman and Hyde Park, and then they come as far from Southeast Michigan to Schaumburg to get that particular place. Taste profile. I was on a panel with someone from the Kellogg Foundation, and they were saying how they were losing Black consumers because they didn't have the taste profile that they preferred. And I said, well, you need to come to our neighborhood because it's there and people really enjoy it. And so to actually have, what's so exciting about the work is that to know that it is an economic hub, that we bring people into the neighborhood. And so it's important that we act as a utility, because during COVID, when so many of the grocery stores were closed, the restaurants literally were where people ate, because that's where the food was. And so, but to also know that it's a net, it's a net income driver where we have excess capacity because of the people who come in who are tourists, and that is an economic hub. That is at least $84 million in sales are annually are derived, and it's that economic multiplier where the money stays in the community. So all of those are really important as far as the visitors are concerned. And we are working really hard on what we're calling creating a Black culinary trail that will feature kind of our best 24 restaurants, so that people can know the difference between if you want a Caribbean experience and you want something that's more Jamaican or more or they serve plantains or whatever it is, that you can do a really deep dive, and so that you'll know exactly what you're getting when you go there. Because we also understand that we have to market our restaurants collectively. We also use MasterCard data, and that's one of the findings that they had, that when we have events, we saw that sales increased by 10% when we had events. And so if we marketed the community, we can increase sales, which means that we can create additional income streams, which we can create generational wealth. And that's the point. And that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea. I would love to do that also in Chinatown, Sarah, to have sort of the context of the different regional cuisines. And Nidra, in your case, it would be so amazing to understand the history of the migration, and as well, not just from the South, but from the Caribbean, and how those different food cultures play out. That would really be even more value added. It's given me chills. I can't wait to get there. So let's just take
I'm coming on that eating tour for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'll see a couple of questions. We have a lot of them and we don't have a lot of time. Let's see. I think we've addressed the issue of language barriers. I think we've addressed the issue of grants versus loans. There has been a question about grocery stores, which is that is something I have experienced. That's a whole other bundle of issues. Sarah or Nidra, do you have a full service grocery store in your business districts?
We do.
Have you tried? Is it an issue?
No, we're not a food desert. We have full service grocery stores, and we have a bunch of bodegas. I mean, are the bodegas serving highly nutritious food? No. But we are pleased that we just got the Southside Market to open at 79th and Vernon. That's serving highly nutritious food and doing food demonstrations. So brick wall, we're getting there.
Yeah. One of the things we found when we do neighborhood surveys every summer is that, grocery stores are an essential amenity. I'm a essential and amenity almost don't go together, but it's
Right.
hard to build, a base of residents who can take advantage of your food businesses if those residents can't get the ingredients they need to make their own dinner at night, right? This is something that we're finding more and more. So the trust is we are leaning in to figure out how to build up grocery stores because we think of those as essential economic anchors into neighborhoods. And then you can, to the point of the sort of that middle neighborhood, it becomes like a core component of building a middle neighborhood. One other thing that we found is that the businesses that we've supported, they do best when they can combine both local and visitor spend. And that's what you're hearing with Nidra and Sarah as well, right? So places in neighborhoods that have been disinvested don't always show up on the numbers as though they could support that business. So if you could make the case that you're going to have people coming in and it's going to be serving local people, you start to give the businesses a bit of a runway for their success. And it feels to me like it's like an antidote to some gentrification, right? You are starting to be able to support more businesses than maybe your core residents can. And that leads to a better community for existing residents.
I think, yes,
grocery stores are essential.
Yeah, the idea of expanding the trade area is the way I was trained 1,000 years ago to think about this. If the businesses are only specific, only attract people within that neighborhood, then you can only count those heads, multiply the amount they spend, and that's all there is to support the business. But if you can expand that, as certainly Sarah and Nidra's districts have, then you're bringing income into the community. You're making a trade area that is much larger to support that business. That's really interesting. And I do think it's interesting to think about the grocery stores. It's almost like lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like that is really basic. People need access to that kind of food. This is a really intriguing one that just came in. Do you have any examples of food halls / incubators specifically tied to low-income housing? I don't know that I grasp, Charlene, the connection to low-income housing, but the food hall kind of thing with the incubator is intriguing to me. Sarah, didn't you say you did a little bit of an incubator?
Yeah, we did an incubator, but they were kind of retail, not food based.
Okay.
We had a short runway to set it up, and so anything that's food based will take a lot longer.
We've funded one in Englewood, but it's not open yet. And so waiting on that to see how that works. I think the larger food halls have struggled in lower income neighborhoods. But the one that we funded in Englewood is more like a 2 to 3 restaurant hub.
Okay.
So it's not trying to be everything to everyone. It's just sort of gonna nurture a small number. And so we're hopeful about that model.
I live in Tucson, and there is one food hall here that was specifically sort of along this. It's in in a part of Tucson that is almost entirely Mexican American, and it's more specific to that genre. And I actually haven't been there yet, so I'm going to go look and see how it's doing. Let's see if I can find one more. I don't want to stop listening to you guys. Food Lab, Nidra. Someone asks, what funding sources enabled you to launch Food Lab? And then what are the resources where are the sources of funding that keep it going?
Great. Kristen's work with the Chicago Community Foundation was really key. They've been our faithful backer for the last 7 years. And then we have Wells Fargo support was really crucial. They gave us a really big grant, and that was when we found hiding in plain sight that we learned that we were Chicagoland's Soul Food Caribbean and West African district, and got really all the stats to understand that we were a real economic restaurant hub. We also have funding from the Coleman Foundation and Polk Brothers. The city of Chicago, their Department of Planning and Development and Business Affairs and Consumer Protection has been really key in helping to turn renters into building owners for restaurants. So those are our major funders. In the future, because we are really confident now that Food Lab scientifically has made a difference, that we plan to scale and replicate Food Lab and offer it to the region and the nation. And so we plan for it to be a social enterprise that will support us and also help other communities so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so we're really looking forward, and we're going to scale that in Q1 of next year. I do want to say that we have, so Professor Han-Sun Jung, we have a lecture that she's going to give to talk about her work. Thank you. On Friday, November 7th at 1 p.m. She's my most recent guru that I've been following all the information about corridor development. She's looked at Chicago and Dallas and New York and Cincinnati to come up with her corridor findings about what works and why. And so we just really want to share her work. And so that's going to happen Friday, November 7th at 1 p.m. AEO will send out that information. It's free, and I can't wait to have her give her jewels. She's also the one who has done all the correlation work about murals and how important it is to really place keep a neighborhood. I think what we're saying, both Sarah and I, is that authenticity is really important. People want to come to a place that is really a place and not Disneyland, and they do come.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you to Sarah and Kristen as well for sharing what you've learned. I do think that more funding will become available as you guys are continue and your peers to share the unbelievable results of these investments. When people know that there is success to be had, they're more likely to give to it. And I think that you've really started to lay the groundwork for that. Thanks for highlighting this upcoming event. I think that's a great way to continue this conversation. And AEO folks, do you want to close us out?
Yes, thank you so much for such a fantastic discussion. We truly appreciate, sharing your time and expertise with all of us. And we invite you to join the event in Chicago. We'll send out more details in a follow-up email. And we invite you to join upcoming webinars hosted by AEO as well, shared in the chat. So thank you again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.